Good morning. I'm Deb Sheridan,
And I'm Cindy Mullen. Welcome to J.L. Simpson Middle School in Leesburg, Virginia.
and today is the last day of school before our winter break. We have one more block to go. So, we are going to take you through planning the writing portion of our class when we return on January 3rd.
Okay, we've already kind of hashed out our anticipatory activity and our reading workshop. So we're going to start right with the writing workshop.
So, our students have been working on responding to the prompts, and they've already done one response and tried to edit that. But now we need to work on their ability to do peer editing, something they have not yet done this year.
And revision, because they're not only going to be fixing the grammatical mistakes, they might be revising for word choice or adding details.
So I think the first thing we need to do is model for them in our mini lesson what peer editing and revision looks like.
Okay, and I agree. Now, as far as our example that we're going to use for modeling, do you want to get permission from one of the students and use one of theirs, or do you think we should create one of our own?
I think it might be helpful if we do one of our own so that we can plan for the mistakes we're seeing across the board with our students.
Okay.
So if we do one that is showing maybe 3 or 4 of the mistakes that we're seeing in their essays, it will kind of lead them into what they need to do on their own.
Okay. So we also talked about creating a checklist that we're going to use for when we model this during our writing mini lesson. So why don't I create the checklist and you create the essay, and focus in on those tier 1 words, because we have been talking a good deal about word choice, and if we kind of include those in,
Right.
then that would be some great ways that we can actually model word choice for them.
Okay, so I will create the essay, you will create the checklist. This time, let's streamline the checklist.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Okay.
I like them boxing in the first word.
I agree.
Because that shows how they begin their sentences. And we're taking that from the Excel strategy when we did the write and grow, or the cut and grow, I'm sorry.
And I think what they're seeing is that they get comfortable starting their sentences exactly the same way.
Okay.
And then they're saying, okay, I need to change this up. Some of them are actually learning how to take a prepositional phrase and move it as an introductory phrase.
Right,
so they're
right.
getting a little more advanced in their
Right.
writing when they're seeing that pattern.
Okay, good. And then I also would like to continue with underlining words that are tier 1 words, but I don't want them to get so focused on that. So I think if we give them a limit, what do you think? I was thinking maybe 2 to 3 words that they want to bump up a level.
I think that's a good place to start.
Okay.
They don't really understand it, and I think if they can focus in on 2 or 3 lower level tier 1 words, and if we can get them to underline in the first 2 paragraphs, if they're really even focusing where they're looking for those.
Okay,
that'd be good. I also think that they need to be circling words that they're seeing overuse of.
Okay,
So
great.
what I'm seeing in patterns is on some of the prompts, if they ask a question like, how do you define success? The word success or a derivative of it, successful, comes up 7 or 8 times in a 3-paragraph response.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to work on that.
Okay, so circle words that are repeated more than 3 times. I think we talked about that.
I think, yep, more than 3 times.
Okay. And then when you had mentioned about, when we talked earlier about adding details, so we need to look, if they look for transition words. If they don't have a transition word, like for example, or in this instance, then they need to make sure they have one, because more than likely, if there isn't a transition word, then maybe they didn't use an example.
And why don't we refer them back to the Excel strategies that we gave them before? There's a list of transition words.
Oh, okay.
And I think most of the kids kept repeating the for example, for example, for example, another example, but we want to bump them up to for instance, or a little more creative way of looking at the details in the examples.
Well, let's have those tents that we made that had some sample transition words on there, out on their desks,
we'll
so
set
that
up the
they can
tents
use
at each
that.
group of desks.
Okay, and then the last thing, because most of what we mentioned here is about revising, but we also need to edit. And some common mistakes that I've been seeing are the lowercase I when they type it, proper nouns, and then the conjunctions.
So I'm thinking that although we know that those are three consistent mistakes, we also want them to refer back to that individual editing list.
Okay, so maybe we need, when we model, you and I each have our own individual editing list as well.
So I'll create that, and that will be.
Well, we have this created. I think.
No, but I mean, I'll create them so that they're addressing some of the things that we're seeing
okay.
so that they're
our model.
Okay. So that it matches the mistakes that we're seeing in the essay, so that they can see. We'll show them how we're looking at our list, looking at our essay, seeing that we've made that mistake and going in and fixing it. We might be using the document camera for that, so that they can literally watch how we're doing it, so they can imitate us.
Okay. So I'm kind of thinking like our I can statement then for this portion of our lesson might be, what do you think?
I was thinking I can revise and edit my own writing for proper word choice, transition words, and punctuation.
Okay, great. So then our little formative evaluation would be their essay 2. We're going to give them essay 2 to edit and revise.
Right. So we will give them each their own individual copy. So when we split into 2 groups, each student will have their own essay in front of them, but we'll be working on a little bit of different strategy.
Let's talk a little more about that, because up until this point, we're going to be doing our little mini lesson, which we are very comfortable with doing team teaching. I will start one thing and the Sheridan finishes my
sentences.
And we are getting pretty good at that. So at this point now, when we break into group after the modeling to get into working with the kids individually and their practice time, I think we need to look at that SA2 that was a summative,
right,
and try to group according to where the students are. We're going to be teaching the same thing, but our delivery method might be different, and depending on the group that we're working with.
So what I saw in that first essay that they were working on is some of the kids are still struggling with organization. Their thesis statements are not clear, and then that makes the body paragraphs fall apart. So one group is probably going to need to go back to the basics.
Okay.
We need to review, how are we writing the clear thesis statement. We might even have them try to draw an arrow. If this is my first point of support, is that what my whole body paragraph is? If this is my second point of support. So we might
color code it.
I think that would be
with
really
highlighters.
helpful.
Okay, great.
Because then they can have a visual of how the thesis statement truly is the roadmap to the rest of the essay.
Okay.
The other thing I'm seeing consistently is that they are very good with their thesis statement. They're consistent in what they're talking about in their body paragraphs, but they're not giving the specific details and examples.
Okay, but if you don't have organization, you can't really start going to the details. So I think one group, like you said, will be organization.
So do I.
But then the other group will be, they've got their organization, but they're missing the details. So I think that's a good ways to decide which students will be in which group.
I think that's a great plan.
Okay. And then as far as when they get to the point where they're actually beyond the revision and start looking at the editing, then that's going to actually be individualized because they each have their own individualized editing list that they can pull from.
So I think that we should keep them in their groups. We will, after we've determined who goes in which group, we're working with them first on just the revision.
Mm-hmm.
And then let them kind of work independently as we're walking around watching them on their editing. Once we feel like they have shown us on their hard copy, then one at a time they're getting their computer. So that's going to be paced differently for each student.
Okay. I'm also thinking that organization, that these are what I'm seeing, or these are the students that need that repetitive and and have something introduced multiple times. It might be beneficial that whoever ends up working with that group, before you get started with the organization, maybe even do like a little mini, like 5-minute review of how the thesis is a roadmap, where we take an essay that's cut up and they kind of have to put it together like a puzzle.
I think that's
and I think they need something tangible like that before they look at their own.
Right. And in the second group, I'm thinking that some kids are going to take longer to do the editing of their own work than others. So we might have a little break-off group of the kids that have their Chromebook,